When I post talks on YouTube, or I know a talk is going to go on YouTube, I try to spell it all out. And this will be the first part, and the second part will be much longer, and that's recorded on location, which will have more explanation. So if what I'm saying isn't clear, the rest of the video on YouTube will explain it. So what do I mean by on location, on site? When I get a new tarot deck, I like to consecrate it by bringing it to a sulfurous pit where the magma is heating the water to a dangerous level, and there's pyrite, which has some spiritual properties. I feel like that's the place to shuffle the deck and begin pulling cards. And in this case, I pulled cards for 4 different locations: the Bardo, the Call, the Trial, the Return. And for the Bardo, the infinite, non-dual, formless, infinite, eternity, beyond space and time, before and after, Alpha, Omega, I got Magician and Judgment. And I didn't want to pick 2 cards, but 2 cards came out, so there you go. And in my talk on site, recorded on site, the talk about the Magician is preambled by a talk about the Fool, because unless you master the Fool, or rather I should say you allow yourself to be a Fool, then you're less likely to properly handle the power of the Magician. So the Darth Vader Voldemort story. And I would say that in some ways the Fool becomes the Magician, and the Magician remembers being the Fool. Otherwise, the Magician's trying to impress other people. Going down the center of the Tree of Life by putting the Bardo with Sphere 1, the Call is then Sphere 6, balance. And often we don't find that balance. So the site that I chose for pulling those cards was after the sulfur pit, after the pyrite exposure, perhaps, in the air, in the lungs, and the cards. It was a fallen tree, but like a really brutally fallen tree, like it had been hit by a giant hammer, forged in the pits of hell. This poor tree was shattered. Don't know how it happened. Maybe lightning, I don't know. But to me, it spoke about imbalance and this desire for balance, but so rarely do we find it. And as you know, if you've heard my talks, the Call is where we have this experience of to humbly appreciate not knowing, thank. And that's beginner's mind, but usually we think we know what we think we need to know. Even if it's positive what we know, we're attached to that as a condition. So the only place that I believe balance is found is in beginner's mind and humbly appreciating, or at least accepting not knowing. If you meet someone who appears to be holy or making lemonade out of lemons, or has a positive attitude despite many reasons not to, it's a wondrous event. And I think it's wise to think, well, is this person just pretending? They're hiding it. Or are there other areas where they're not so perfect? Like they have a favorite child or something. And this reminds me of the clockmakers of days of old who would intentionally put an error in their clock, a mistake. Not with the time, but these works of art would have one little imperfection in them to make it clear that they were not trying to be divine. So to me, that's representative of this Fool to Magician and this humility around our imbalance. When we think we know, or think we need to know, that's when we get polarized. Sphere 8, left side of the tree. Sphere 7, right side of the tree. Static, left side of the tree. Dynamic, right side of the tree. Free child, left side of the tree. Adaptive child, left side of the tree. Free child, right side of the tree. Could be negative or positive, depending on whether the Sattva with the Rajas or Sattva with the Tamas. Rajas on the right side of the tree, Tamas with the left side of the tree. Tamas isn't all bad. If you have sattva in there, it can be a force for status quo, stability, and Rajas isn't always angry or excessive. It has sattva with it, and it's evolution and change. So the card that came up for the call, Sphere 6, the balance, 2 cards came up. Again, I didn't want 2 cards, but 2 cards came, so that's fine. And one was the Chariot, which I associate with Kundalini rising or falling. If you're sad, falling, allowing yourself to experience that, to be the road by which that falling emotional energy or fatigue happens, or rising, where there's hope, desire. But you're not the charioteer. You're not even the chariot, you're the road on which the chariot travels. And if the chariot is unbalanced, if all 4 wheels are not aligned and in good working order, then you're going to veer to the left or the right. We're attempting to get back to the Sphere 1 or get to Sphere 10 manifestation without deviating from the center line, but very few people can do that. And so we want to be compassionate about ourselves. And I think when we compare, you've heard compare and despair, when we compare ourselves to others who are further along in some realms, spiritual, material, artistic, athletic, attractiveness, success in their lives by any standards, we can feel badly about ourselves. And that's an opportunity to just allow that chariot to do what it's doing and to be present and hold space for that. That is Sphere 3, 3 of Wands pointing to that, of understanding. That's the feminine, stereotypical feminine quality. The yin aspect, which is meeting the creativity coming out of the yang aspect of Sphere 2. Sphere 1 is combining both the yin and the yang energy. In modern religion, we're mainly looking at the divine as yang, but I would say it's more yin than anything, but it requires the yang energy for it to manifest in a material universe of time and space. Probably. Anyway, so that was the call. And then the trial is associated with Sphere 9 in my system, a system that has no name, and that's not to name a thing. That's where the imagination gets us in trouble. We start naming things, we start imagining things, we lose the present. If you're familiar with my talks, the trial is about making this moment about this moment, just as the call is about to humbly appreciate not knowing, or at least accept not knowing. The trial that we're here for, our obligation and what we're trying to do is to make this moment about this moment. Consider you may only be here for a moment, or a few moments, and you're gone, to be replaced by a new you or some other entity. You never step in the same river twice, after all. So just make this moment about this moment, but typically we fail in that. We can't appreciate not knowing, and we can't make this moment about this moment. So where did I draw this card? I went to a sulfur pit, I went to a tree knocked over by a lightning bolt or something. I went to Costco because I think our endeavor is to find holiness, balance, completeness, integration, harmony everywhere, even Costco. And it's very hard to make this moment about this moment when you're food shopping or shopping for items. They made it easier because it's easy to return things, but still, you're really in the material world, and there's nothing that appears to be holy or sacred or balanced. And so the card I got was Queen of Cups, and when I connected with that idea of the emotions, I was able to be fully present in Costco for a moment. The cup is the receptacle of the container. It's where things are inside of. And the queen is perhaps the best symbol of that. Not mastery of emotions, as the king would have it, but the allowing for emotions, as the queen would have it. Scientific research has shown that emotional regulation is important, regulating your emotions, but much more important, if you're talking about happiness, sense of peace, is self-acceptance. And who better than the queen to to give you that acceptance. And then the final card was for the return. And again, 2 cards came out. And you can call this coincidence, but the 2 cards that came out were both 5s. What is 5 plus 5? 10. Sphere 10, the manifestation. I would say that we don't actually see the manifestation. All we see is our imagination about it. And I want to talk about the center of the tree of life. If you're at the top of the tree, sphere 1, unity. If you're at sphere 6, you're ignoring the fact that there's Da'ath, which is a hidden or removed sphere. Maybe that's Eve taking the apple. In any case, what we see is sphere 1 is unity, sphere 6 is balance. Now, we can map the unity to the bardo. Pure yin, receptivity, timeless, formless, infinite, stillness, emptiness, the way in Taoism, unity, non-duality, the divine. And when we exit, if we don't go sphere 2 or sphere 3, we go right down to sphere 6, right down to balance. And it's pretty far down in terms of the levels of reality with respect to gross, subtle, causal, non-dual. It's further down. You can say in a way that the sphere 6 is like the heart chakra of the tree. It's kind of the glue that holds the whole thing together. There's no balance, and there isn't balance when we're on one side of the tree or the other. It's there to pull us back. And so the call, trial, return, bardo, the call is the question about balance. We're called to balance, or as we've been saying, to humbly appreciate not knowing. If you cannot appreciate not knowing, or at least accept not knowing, you're out of balance, because sphere 7, negative free child, sphere 8, negative adaptive child, are going to push an agenda. You're most likely to identify as the author of that agenda, and you're most likely to suppress the other view. Let me submit to you, and Jung talked about the mask and the shadow, that anytime you feel sure of something, the way and the reason and the possibility to feel sure about it is by suppressing a contrary thought into the shadow. Therefore, if you feel sure that the negative adaptive child is right, that you should conform and obey, sphere 8, the group, or you feel sure that you need to rebel or conquer, be mischievous or aggressive, sphere 7, sphere 8, the individual, if you feel sure about that, if you feel sure, sphere 7, that what's important is generation after generation after generation, the future, or sphere 8, the group, the status quo, if you feel sure about any of those polarities, you're not balanced, and you're not appreciating, or at least accepting not knowing. Only by appreciating or accepting not knowing is balance possible, in my view. And so, as we move down from sphere 1, out of the bardo, sphere 1, into the call, sphere 6, can we appreciate not knowing? And know that if we don't, and it's okay, it's biological reasons not to appreciate not knowing. If we cannot appreciate or accept not knowing, then we are called to know, or called to try to know, or called to insist that we do know, or called to replace what we know with something else that we know. Imbalance. That stress carries us through into the imagination, the trial, sphere 9. And that's where the battle between negative adaptive child, negative free child, purpose and limits, group and individual, sphere 8, sphere 7. Tamas and Rajas. Now, I should point out, and I hope to do this every time I speak about this, if you have Tamas with Sattva, that's a higher state. If you have Rajas with Sattva, it's a higher state.
So if you're a positive adaptive child on the left side of the tree, that's sattva, higher state. If you have rajas with sattva, that's free child, positive free child on the right side. I don't talk about those positive states very much because they're not easy to find or maintain. Especially if you had childhood trauma or just felt loving was conditionally based from your parents and from your peers. So, we're in the trial, and imagination is determining that we do know, that we need to know, or replacing what we know with something that we didn't know before, and now we know. It's all about certainty, not beginner's mind. That's the trial. And then finally, the return. That's the manifestation. In the manifestation, actual reality is happening. Now, I would submit to you that we may not ever actually see it, or we may only see it for a moment, or we may only see it in awakening. The manifestation is, like, how do I explain this? Color isn't a thing, right? It's interpreted by our mind. It's just a vibration. Music is an interpretation of sound waves moving through some kind of medium, usually air. The room you're in is actually completely dark. Your mind is what's showing it as having colors and shapes. Yes, those shapes are there. Yes, those frequencies are there, but they don't have any experiential reality. It's all an interpretation. And consecrating a new deck is to shuffle cards at a sulfurous pit, and then pull the first card there, and then pull it at 4 different points along the way. And the last time I did this, I did it with 7 points for each chakra and each stage in spiral dynamics. But this time we're only going to do 4. And also, this is the first time we're speaking about the paradigm of Bardo call, trial, return with respect to a vertical descending the center of the tree of life. Never done that before, as far as I can remember. And so it's possible that we'll only use this deck for that, and the other deck for the 3-card pulling. And then we have to think about what question we want to be asking. This deck is semi-traditional. It's thematically linked to the Rider-Waite, but the layout is often different and elements are different. I want to talk about the call and balance and anxiety, stress, and judgment. Yes, there will be anxiety if there's not unconditional positive self-regard. If your positive self-regard, if your unconditional self-acceptance is missing, because now your positive self-regard is conditional based on something that you have or you think you can get or that you had at one point, or you're removing self-love, most likely because conditions haven't been met, then there's going to be anxiety. And then if there's anxiety, you can't make this moment about this moment, and you can't avoid stress, because stress is the desire to get rid of something you're having, and anxiety is the definition of not being happy with what you had, will have, or are having. So therefore, anxiety and stress are part of the imbalance. And then, as we move from the call and whether or not we have balance, and into the trial of the imagination, that's where judgments come up, in the imagination. I shuffled and pulled the card at the foot of an acid pit, sulfur, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Supposedly, people have burned themselves. A place where the ground is always shifting, and I was asking about the Bardo, the mystery, how I could appreciate not knowing, because if I could appreciate not knowing the ultimate mystery, and the small mysteries about mistakes I've made or ways to avoid future mistakes wouldn't be giving me any kind of anxiety, stress, or judgment. And magician may be the key to that. As you know, the magician has the 4 suits. And as you know, the 4 suits relate to things that are happening to us in our lives, as opposed to more cosmic principles of the major arcana. The thing that is significant for me about the magician is that it's considered the first card, but it's really the second card. The Fool is the first card. Let's first talk about the Fool. The Fool is the kind of person who does things for others without expecting any compensation. Taoists value the Fool because the Fool is not trying to get any attention toward him or herself. Living in the woods, babbling perhaps, incomprehensible. But if you listen closely, the Fool may contain more wisdom than the so-called wise man. So the Fool may have a job that doesn't bring any accolades, maybe doesn't pay very much, or at least no opportunity for advancement, or getting credit for things. Maybe the Fool has a boss that doesn't appreciate him or her, or coworkers that don't, or clients that don't. Fool is definitely not puffing up the ego with success. I would say in many ways the Fool is someone who would take a tarot deck like myself, walk through snowy rain, not dressed properly, all to consecrate a tarot deck. But I didn't get the Fool card, I got the Magician card. So the Magician, some people talk about the Magician guiding the Fool along the journey, at least the first step. And you can put it that way. I think the Magician is also could be seen as an evolution of the Fool. Because if you have a grounding in the selflessness, if people laugh at you, which people laughed at me today and they often scratch their heads about me, then you have that grounding. You have that grounding for that becoming the Magician is less likely to puff you up. Because becoming a magician is a way to get attention and have people appreciate you. And then the ego gets inflated. Ordinarily, telling the truth is ideal. But when it comes to the arcane, or mysterious sulfur springs, people may not be willing to get all the details. They may get bored or distracted. Or they may misuse it on purpose to gain something. Just as the idea of the magician, mastery over the suits, mastery over the tarot, mastery over some arcane knowledge or power to remove negative self-thought. In other words, to find conditional self-acceptance. But it's about unconditional self-acceptance. And so you may have to tell incomplete truth or lies.